Our next conversation is on spoken word. I have never understood what spoken word is. Okay, it can be a sung word. It's all right. But our guest will help us understand this. Dophanage is here. He is a poet. He's somebody who is very good with words, and also when poetry is used to communicate a message and to stir action. Dophanage, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Well, as good as a Kenyan can do right now. So.
As good.
Umeanza.
Inject from the beginning. Yeah.
We're fixing the nation, aren't we?
We are.
Umeanza. Karibu sana. Thank you for joining us.
Nashukuru.
Janet is going to fix you with the day's quote.
Fix you with the day's quote. The day's quote is, I don't have to chase extraordinary moments to find happiness. It's right in front of me if I'm paying attention and practicing gratitude. That's by Brené Brown. How do you interpret that quote?
I think when I look at life in general, so many of us are not trying to be millionaires or billionaires. We're just looking for a dignified life, right? So if I didn't have to worry about not having fare, not having food on the table, not worried about my rent and that kind of stuff, I wouldn't really mind not having money in my pocket, right? So, and that's the way I look at life. I'm not trying to come out as the richest person ever, right? I don't even think the whole accumulation of wealth is ethical in itself, right? Especially when there is so much inequality in the world. So, for me, happiness is just looking at the next person and seeing that they are happy, right? If they're not happy, definitely that is going to spill over, right? So my happiness is to see the next person happy, right?
Period.
Like
Period. Thank you.
Right.
Who's Dophanage?
Dophanage is a young man from the slopes of Mount Kenya. What we call Kirimara out there. I'm from Meru, so it's Kirimara, so as it is Kirinyaga to the Kikuyus, right? And then I'm a writer, a performer, an engaged Kenyan, an engaged human being. I don't know, there's so many ways you can pan it, but I think I'm just a young person who cares about people, right? And happens to be talented with words.
that part, words. Eric said I like spoken word. What exactly is that? But if you had to explain it to someone, what is spoken word? And then what's the difference between that and poetry and rap and, all of that?
I think it's something to be said about the semantics, because whichever way you look at it, it's so basically the most basic definition is that it's poetry written for performance purposes, right? So, but we've had people who are rappers come and perform their verses spoken, right? We've had some performing spoken word artists sing their poetry, right? So there's a very fluid identity to that.
Right.
But mostly it's just spoken poetry written for performance purposes. So, for example, where in a written poem, I would not use gestures, right? So in spoken word, I'm allowed to do that. I can use my intonations to kind of emphasize the message, right? So it's and I think for me that's I enjoy that a lot. And also you don't have the limitations of working on a beat instrument or anything. Just you can speak at your own pace, at your own rhythm. Yeah.
I've always thought of rap as exactly that, poetry with
but that's what rap is. Right? Rap is rhythm and poetry.
Right.
So it's just that people, I think when it became a genre of music, then people started thinking of it as something that is distinct, right? But it's rhythm and poetry.
That's it.
So you take the rhythm and the poetry and you put it together and you get rap.
What does spoken word add to poetry? Being able to perform and to gesture, and to speak with your body. What does it add to poetry?
I think it adds, this is the way I like to think of it, right? Poetry was a dying art form, right? Poetry was a dying art form because of how elitist it had become. Right? It had become for the select few in society. But spoken word brought it back because spoken word brought poetry back to its roots. And the roots of poetry is in the essence of, you think of any indigenous language, even Swahili, even English in itself, right? The languages are very poetic in nature. You speak to any local person from whatever, and there's certain images, there's a way they use words that is very particular to them, right? And that's poetry. But when it went to the books and the pages, then it became like, it's this alien thing. But it's always been a part of us. So spoken word kind of reclaimed that aspect of poetry, where it's, in the way we resonate every day. Like it's just brought poetry back to the streets, so to say.
Did we have accommodations for poetry and spoken word in African literature and in our history? Or is this a foreign concept to us, fairly foreign?
I think we've always had that, right? We've always had that. It's just that now in the contemporary sense, probably not. But in a traditional sense, there's so many art forms that are so poetic. Like I know, for example, in Meru, there's probably 10, right? Different, ways in which people express themselves and in words with rhythm and all that, right? But, maybe because a lot of now the contemporary setup of it, we borrowed that from hip hop, which also gave birth to spoken word in its contemporary sense, right? So it feels like it's a borrowed concept, but I don't think it's a borrowed concept. I think it's just African culture finding its way back to Africa, right?
Yeah. Is Shairi a form of spoken word?
It is.
It is, huh?
It is.
Okay.
All right. It's just that, maybe the structure is a bit very particular, but it is. Because now for spoken word, it's really so much about the believability of it, right? That's the strength of it. It's just, we're having a conversation. So when I'm speaking, it's just, and because there's also the dynamic between spoken word and theater. Theater needs a lot of melodrama. We have to emphasize a lot of, so that sometimes that might not be very believable. But with spoken word, it's more like, we're having this conversation, right? So I'm not trying to do a lot. I'm just speaking to you, right?
Do conversations like this shape your day-to-day? Is for you spoken word, how does it shape your day-to-day? Do you look at circumstances and say there's something there? Are there some times where there's no story, or is there a story in everything? And does it shape how you then put together your spoken word?
Yeah, they do. And I think there's a story in everything. There's a story here. There's a story, between the way we're engaging with the screen. There's a story, because you don't know how this conversation is impacting the person who's watching it, right? And the different people watching it from wherever. So it's the way I look at it is that like we artists, right? And a lot of the times for those very great artists that so like they were ahead of their times, and I don't think they were ahead of their times. I think they were just in tune with the times, right? So whereas everybody else is caught between, trying to punch in, at 8 a.m. and 5 and, kind of put food on the table, artists immerse themselves in the life, right? So every experience, it might not reflect in the poetry immediately. Sometimes it might take years before it comes out in the poetry, right? But all those experiences that I lived through, they eventually they are going to come out in form of words someday, right? So, and that's, so for me, I try to immerse myself in life as much as possible, like just because I know that goes into my repertoire of knowledge, my repertoire of experiences that I can always tap into and now express that.
Yeah. Talk to us about Minority Report. Is it the first spoken word that catapulted you for people to know what you're doing? Was there something before?
No, there was a lot
was like
before.
significant.
Yeah, that was significant because of I think it captured the frustrations of people. But funny enough that that piece was I wrote that piece in 2016, right? So basically, so there's the old the previous president, the current president, they have their business at The Hague, right? They're acquitted. We know not necessarily because there was innocence to do with it, but more because some witnesses disappeared, some recanted, and when they were acquitted, they thought the most ideal venue for them to come and celebrate that is Nakuru, and for me that just dropped me off, because that Nakuru is kind of very significant in terms of the places that were most affected by the post-colonial, post-election violence, right? And so for you to go and celebrate there when they're actual victims of that thing, and we know, we might not have the actual facts, or maybe the case didn't go where it was supposed to go, but we know you guys are guilty, right? But so essentially you're just pretty much going to, closer to the victims and tell them, what are you going to do about it, right? And so when I was writing that piece, like it's one of the pieces that I wrote, it took me the shortest time to write. I've probably done in an hour. I did a bit of, editing later, but I was within like 1.5 hours, I was done writing it. Like the whole flow of thought just came to me. And, as technically astute as it is, because so many people have told me they've tried writing like that. I haven't been able to recreate that kind of writing, technically. But it just tells you how much in the moment I was and how much frustrated I was. And I think I was just trying to capture those frustrations because I knew it wasn't just my frustrations. It was frustrations of millions of people, right? So, and then because of that, of course, it resonated. And I think it's one of the pieces that I've performed, the most. Right.
1 or 2 lines you can share that you feel really resonated with people?
Vanguard ina guard van kufikisha oppressor kwa safe house. Safe house haina room ya kulinda welfare victims. Victims wana wish vitu zingekuwa safer. Safer juu wameleta oppression na discount. Na discounts ziko lacking kwa bei za bidhaa. Bidhaa quality yake ni wanting. Wanting na sijasikia mention kwa idhaa. Idhaa za habari counterfeit. Counterfeit wanaleta propaganda kwa mitaa. Mitaa wakulima ni beggars. Beggars wamebeba nchi kwa bega.
That is...
Sorry.
It's
just a snip of it, and you can tell that it's saying something. So for people who have heard the majority, it's majority or minority?
Minority.
The minority report for the first time.
It should actually be majority though.
Right.
But,
yeah.
but I was, the way I was looking at it is that, it's a majority people with a minority representation.
Minority
right?
say.
Right,
You
yeah.
know?
So,
majority people with a minority say.
Yeah.
People who are hearing that for the first time, what is it?
It's a spoken word piece that's out there. There's videos of performances. There's an actual video that we shot in town. Yeah, so and it's also available on streaming platforms. So it's a spoken word poetry poem by Dolphinage.
What's the storyline?
So the storyline really capturing the frustrations of Kenya. Right now, so a lot of people probably watch this and they'll be like, this speaks about the moment. And that's what I was saying, about artists being ahead of their time. And, it's not so much about that. It's so much about being in tune with the times. Because you listen to it right now, it feels like it's talking about now.
Yeah.
Which for me, it's a bittersweet thing because, okay, on one end, I appreciate that, it resonates,
relevant.
Right? But on the other end, it just says nothing has really changed.
Yeah.
Right? And that's sad.
It is very sad. Your beret has a pin there.
Yeah.
Mwariama.
Mwariama, yeah.
Tuambie, what about Mwariama?
2023, I did a show. That was Mwariama, Truth Be Told. Where I grew up in Timao, is like 5 kilometers from where Mwariama used to live. Right?
Who is Mwariama?
Mwariama,
Yeah.
Mwariama is the highest ranking Mau Mau fighter at Independence, right? At Independence.
What was he? Field Marshal?
Yeah. Field Marshal Mwariama. So, and very little is known about him. I feel like in terms of just to provide a bit of context, in terms of the history and relevance, I feel his role at Independence was probably, if as much as, if not more, than Oginga Odinga, right? Because he's the one person that Kenyatta needed to convince to talk to the rest of the Mau Mau to lay their arms down, right? So, while there was still, before independence, I think somewhere in 63, early 63 or somewhere in 62, they had to sneak him into Gatundu, get him to talk with Jomo, and then like 2 times, right? Just to kind of, agree on how that is going to happen. Because, Jomo called him and he was like, so we have the, independence is in the offing, so, and I need you to talk to
the other fighters.
Yeah, so Mwariama is one of those people that it needs to be, very much relevant in our country's history, but It's not, simply because the narrative had to suit a particular perception, right?
I was going to ask that. Why the erasure of a field marshal of his level from our history? And is it erasure, or is it just that we were not the ones writing the books, so we didn't have the chance to include him?
There's that, right? There's a lot of that, and also I think to sustain, I would say to sustain the Kikuyu hegemony, right? What people call the Damakistan, whatever, right? Is that the contributions of the rest of the Kenya, right? The other ethnic groups had to be downplayed, right? And to date, it's still happening, right? So it's like when people talk about Mrima, they don't talk about Mrima in context with the actual residents of the Mrima. They talk about Mrima in the context of Central. Most Central people can't even see the Mrima during the day. I come from Timau. I wake up to the Mrima every day, right? So, but when people are talking about the Mrima, they're not talking about me. They're talking about people who can't even see it.
From your reading, do you think there's been erasure of other communities, include like participation in the fight for independence?
Yeah, very much so. Because people don't know there were generals who are Luo in the Mau Mau, right? And I know, for example, Kimathi gets executed in 57, and by that time, there was a lot, like the Kikuyu side of the Mau Mau, like there was a lot of splits. So it was after that, it just became just different pockets, right? But so the bigger chunk of the Mau Mau, 57 onwards, is in Meru, right? So there was more Merus in the Mau Mau post 57, all the way from 57 to 63, than from the Kikuyu, right? But people don't know that because, as far as the mainstream narrative is concerned, Mau Mau was made of Kikuyu people, right?
Who wrote this narrative? Because there's a lot of erasure of so many things that happened, the contribution of women to the fight for independence as well. But I always ask myself, who was writing and how did it benefit them to now, push this narrative the way it is?
I think for you to understand who it benefited, you have to look at, like Kenya right now, right? And look at the levels of marginalization, right? So basically, of course, if that divide and rule concept that when it's introduced by the colonialists is perpetuated over and over, right? Of course, that creates a certain kind of classist society where, there are certain communities that are well represented, they benefit more than others. But for the most part, it's not even the communities, right? For the most part, is that there's a political elite that was brought in deliberately to fill in that, that political elite that was there during the colonial times, right? And it has perpetuated itself in that. Because I always ask people who, it's like, Kenya is tribal. Kenya is not tribal. Kenya is classist, right? Because you secede Kenya.
Sorry, that's who said that.
Kenya is not
I've already
tribal.
taken two from the conversation so far.
Kenya is classist.
Yeah,
Not tribal.
that's a good who said that, yeah.
Because if you secede Kenya right now, right, into different, so you say like there's a Luo nation, there's a Kikuyu nation, there's a Maasai nation, what? Are you trying to tell me that the rich Maasai is not going to oppress the poor Maasai?
Wow.
Right? Or vice versa? They are going to, right? But, somebody has, because that tribal card is so convenient when it suits, the political elite. It always comes out, when it's needed, right?
So what was the story of Field Marshal Mariama? What happened to him after independence?
One is that, so Jamhuri 63, right? All those images and even the video you see of him and Kenyatta. So that happens, right? And they trusted him. They trusted Kenyatta because for them he was an elder, right? And Africans, we respect our elders, right? And so when Mariama in that video is saying "Ora babaka uga," which means whatever father says, we young men are okay with it. Yeah, we are okay with that, right? And so, but before the end of that year, 12th of December, before 31st of December, Mariama was in jail. Right, was in jail because, so went back to his camp in Nyambene, right? And I think two comrades of him from, Nairobi went to visit and they were supposed to, so he wanted them to address his fighters. He had a troop of over 2,000 men and women, right? And I think by that time, the government has kind of sent some police to maintain law and order, whatever. And so the police were like, no, you can't. These people cannot speak. Mwarima was like, no, these are my comrades. They have to speak. And I think he was slapped with obstruction of whatever, and sentenced to 5 years by a judge, and he was in jail for up to, I think, May of the next year, which is 64, when so Kenyatta kind of made an effort to make it appear that he intervened, and he was released. They gave him a position as a sub chief, which I think at some point just bored him. And then he resigned, and then kind of resigned into his quiet life in Timao until 1989 now. And I think this is another point where 89, when they visit some other comrades of theirs in Ukambani somewhere, and they were with Field Marshal Muthoni. I didn't know that until I met one of the nieces of Field Marshal Muthoni, and they mentioned that they were together at that time. So they went there, and I think somebody got bit by a snake, right? And Mwarima, being Mwarima, as selfless as ever, did what they used to do in the forest. If somebody got bit, you suck off the poison, and everything's okay. But then by that time, he doesn't know his teeth has cavities. So the poison killed him, but the person who was bit survived. Right?
Wow.
And you tell that story. You'll spit some lines after this break
sure.
from Mwarima.
Sure.
This is awesome. Dolphinage is our guest when poetry speaks, is what we're talking about. We are taking a quick break at 28 minutes to 9. Back shortly, we'll also be looking at what people are saying about, the wisdom that you're speaking this morning.
I don't know about
Keep it
that.
here.
On YouTube, a lot of you are resonating and some are disagreeing. Small and Steph anasema wase wa spoken words ukuanga talented mbaya but underrated at the same time. Hadi unashindwa mbona kama hizo lines amespit ni za zama but vitu unaweza relate nazo sahi ni maprophets au nini. Na amesema no, they're just in tune with the time and things are not changing. That's why poetry from 2016 can resonate with us now. Alafu Wamukuha amesema this young man should read, not rewrite history to fit himself. And I'll get into that in a little bit because the Kikombe says, when you get back in time and analyze the freedom we claimed we fought for and reclaimed, you may truly question the path of leadership we got those days that have led us to our current predicament. So, and this is my perhaps response also to Amukuha, there is, like I said, a lot of erasure of our history and of what actually happened around the fight for independence, around colonialism. And I think it's important to try and get information from as many sources as possible. What the Kikombe is saying is very true. When you interrogate how we came to be independent, you'll find that it's not as rosy as the history books paint it out to be. And it was not like, we were deserving of independence and we fought so hard and they gave it to us and we won. It's a little bit more tricky than that. And that thread from the first Kenyatta to Moi to the second Kenyatta, there is a thread there that we need to pull on. But I want to speak to Dolphinage and what that looks like. When you read, when you research, how do you draw conclusions? And then how do you now turn them into art? Is it something that comes naturally to you? Or is it a conscious process of, I want when you're leaving this show, I want you to have this information. I want you to have this change or this shift in your mind.
I think, I think just to respond to what I think the second comment.
Oh yeah, this young man should read, not rewrite history.
I think
to
it's just
himself.
You cannot build on floating foundations, right? We didn't just find ourselves here. We didn't happen in a vacuum, right? There was, somebody had to lay the foundation, right? And then the floors below us. And so that argument for me, I can't accept that, right? Because if you don't appreciate that foundation, then you assume that this is where it begins. And that's the reason why we're talking about historical injustices, the reason why we're talking about the inequalities is because they're all rooted on a foundation right, we set off on the wrong foot. And unless we can reclaim our footprints and find, the right one, then it's because essentially what you're saying is that is the same, narrative people keep on pushing where, everybody's talking about peace. Nobody mentions justice, right? So essentially when you're talking about peace and there's no justice, it means you're saying the people who violated other people's rights, we can forget about it. Like we can just look away, as long as it's peaceful out here. But what do you think goes on in those people's minds? Right now we're talking about femicide, right? And we're talking about like gender-based violence. It's essentially it's parents getting together to come up with an agreement that, you're not going to jail for violating our child, if you can pay us. But that child is going to grow up seeing their abuser all their life. What does that do to them in the head, right? And that's exactly where we are as Kenyans, right? We've been violated so many times and we've been forced to, every day just stay tuned to what your abuser is saying. And that's what I'm saying. Like at some point we have to start withdrawing our audience. We're like, nope, you lied to us, we're not listening to you, right? Nope, you did this, you killed us, we're not listening to you, right? Because essentially, it doesn't matter whether it's on a negative note or a positive note. The moment you provide that person with the audience and the presence they need, it's easy for them to manufacture consent, right? Because the images, when pictures are taken, somebody just looks at the pictures, it's you, and there's thousands of people behind you. What do they see? They see support. A picture doesn't say, these people are booing you.
Manufacture consent. Yeah, yep. I'm going to remember that. There's some platforms that have actually been banned for amplifying independent African voices in history. Yeah. Which I remember seeing that and alarm bells went off because it's like, which truth is it that you don't want to be revealed? Right. Is that part of the responsibility you feel, which is to say, because a lot of people don't know the history that you're talking about, orphanage. There's a lot of people listening to this, either they're triggered, like the one saying you're writing your own history, or they genuinely don't know. But it's also intentional. It's actually banned. People have tried to come up with it, amassed millions of viewers and listeners, and then you're told you're a spy or whatever it is. So how then does spoken word come in to be an ally to allow us to because I think we can only know where we're going if we know where we're coming from. I
think spoken word comes in the way any form of art would, right? And that is in humanizing the conversations. Because there are people, when I read the history, like it's a lot of this history is in books, in conversations, interviews, wherever. So art comes in to humanize that conversation, to put a human face to the numbers, because the experts will do the statistics bait and all that, right? The analysis. But now art comes into those are not just numbers. Those are actual individuals who have their families, who have their lives, right? And that's where art comes in. So when for me, I think, I don't know, I always feel like this, I didn't choose this. If I was to choose this, like this, it's a very hard life to be the kind of person I am, the kind of artist I am, right? It has to have chosen me, and I can't look away. Okay, for some people, it's easy to look away. I just can't help it, right? And I think Tupac said, if God wanted me to have a different life, right, he wouldn't let me feel so much. He wouldn't let me see so much, right? Because when other people choose to just shut themselves off that so that they can continue going, some of us can't. When I see somebody suffering, like that is as much, me suffering as they are, right? And I think also somebody else, Nikki Giovanni, rest in peace, she passed away a few months ago, she said, like, artists, poets basically, like she said, we don't necessarily create out of our own experience. Of course, our experiences come in, but mostly it's empathy, right? Right? So, because if you could create out of your own experiences, you can only write so much before you have exhausted it, right? So it's the empathy that, I'm able to resonate with your pain, with your joy, that's how we are able to continue creating. And there's billions of people in this world, so there's a lot of resonance.
So it's a burden and a blessing.
No, it is. That much it is.
It's a heavy burden.
No, it is a heavy burden.
Do you feel the burden of, even after you have, captured the feelings of the people and put them into spoken word and performed them, when nothing happens?
Of course.
So
it's frustrating.
What does it drive you to want to do?
I think the way I look at it is, also took me a long time to get here, right? I wasn't born knowing all the things I know. I wasn't born, experiencing all that and being able to write as much as I have. It's taken me time to find the language to put it all in words, right? And so the way I look at it is that people are not computers, right? You don't click and something pops up, right? It takes time. And for somebody, it's going to be snapped. They're going to resonate immediately. For somebody else, it's probably going to take decades before it makes sense to them. And that's okay. Because we're humans, and we are diverse in that way, right? And I think everything falls asunder when we try to imply that, we're all the same. We're not, right? Even biology, as much as people try to make it appear like it's black and white, it's not black and white. If biology was black and white, everybody would be born, in full health and, with full abilities, right? But that's not the case. So we can't just pick and choose whatever serves us, right?
Following up on Eric's question, then what's audience responsibility to support people like you? What's the challenge? How do you get people to be an ally? Not just, oh, good show, but to kind of walk that journey and continue to support your art and your vision?
I think now I would like to respond to that like from a personal, but I feel it's not really so much about the personal, so much about like our art has been bastardized and sterilized, in the current society, because art has always been relevant to people, whether they like it or not, right? The reason we know a lot of the things we know is because somebody sang it in a song, somebody wrote a poem about it, somebody wrote a book about it, somebody made a film about it, right? So this artist doing so much work right now that we can't see, right? So essentially the way you can support is, just show up if you can show up, right? If you can't, support if you're able to, right? Because I've had people, the way I've been able to continue doing this is that people have come through for me, right? I sell merchandise people are going to buy. Some people, the people out of the country who can make it to some of my shows. Somebody's like, no, I'm going to pay for 10 of your tickets. Please just, I would love to be there, but I can't. So they pay for 10 of my tickets, and then I give to those who are not able to buy, right? And whether it's streaming the work, if you have the money, or if you know of opportunities that come your way, and this would suit this person, please by all means recommend us, recommend the artist that would suit that role, because they need it, right? And that's in a way that's how you're fixing the nation, because if they are the voices, right? If they are the vessels carrying this message to the masses, then they need to be in a position where they don't have to worry about the basics, which is a privilege we don't really, I personally don't have. Like, I still have to do this and still, kind of think about, like, rent is on the way, like, and I need to eat and all that kind of stuff, right?
Right. So what's the fix now that, anyway, I feel like if 2 months into the show, my personal politics are finally going to show. We are classist, not tribalist.
Yeah.
Capitalism, root of all evil.
Sure.
What's the fix?
The fix is here, right? Everything starts with a conversation, right? So because if you're not having dialogues around these things, then we are jumping into conclusions, right? It's like, I didn't know you before you became a part of this show, right? So if I had met you in the streets, it would be like,
Hi.
That, no, not even hi. Like that it would come with all the connotations and all the stereotypes of anybody who looks like you, right? Because I don't know you. But then we get to a point where now, we've known each other. We get to have a conversation, right? If we have a conversation, then it means I can, then now you're no longer just a random person, a stranger, right? Now you're Mariam, right? And this is what you do. And that. So the moment we have conversations, then it means all the assumptions and all the conclusions we have jumped to, they get. It's like when you see a white person, you're like, hey, ule mlami, mzungu, nini. But then you get to know them. They're no longer just a mlami. You know them by name, right? You know they come from this country. You know this is what they do, right? And so you don't make an assumption that, oh, white people are devils, right? And now, so that's a devil right there. You have to interact with them in person to get to know that, right? And so means you have to provide that room for conversation, room for dialogue, right?
Yeah. Somebody says everything starts with conversations.
Yeah.
Difficult conversation. That's the Kikombe. Back to Mwariama.
Yeah.
And you're going to spit some lines. So Mwariama is a show that you created.
Yeah, yeah.
And it says Mwariama, truth be told.
Yeah.
Correct me, but in Kimeru, Mwariama means the one who speaks the truth.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the original truthful man.
Yeah.
Right? So Mwariama.
Yeah.
Field Marshal Mwariama. Some lines from it.
Mwaka 2023 mwezi wa 6, msanii amejiekelea kwa bedsitter, anajaribu ku make sense ya haya maisha. Yeye ni nani? Ameapa kuwa msanii ndio, but kwa hii dunia hiyo ina maana gani? Anashangaa mbona wengine wako tu iga kusherekea kufika, but kwake ni muhimu zaidi kujua atatumia njia gani. Mbona ameshindwa kupea historia kisoko kama wengine? Mbona anajipata akiegemea kushoto wakati dunia mzima inalenga pande nyingine? Could it be iko na something to do na wakati na mali alizaliwa? For a moment anajiona kwa slopes za Kirimara Timao, akiomboleza what remains of the fading ghost ya Maumau. Somehow alisikia jina Mwariama utotoni na kuisahau. What are the odds that mamake ali-experience labor 89 Madaraka? Could it be that path ilikuwa scripted from the start? Vile sunset ya Mwariama na sunrise yake zikuwa mere 5 months apart. In his quest ya kujaribu kubridge present na past, anajipata kitafakari cost ya betrayal. Venye usaliti ugeuza baraka kwa kasi. Inakuaje matunda ya uhuru 63 yaligeuka mashaka 64, Mwariama kujipata jela, na masikitiko 65, Baimungi kuuliwa katasi ya mtu alikuwa anaita Fadhela. 60 years later bado ni ufala. Since hizo 60s na bado tunalia ufukara. Majority wamesota na kuna watu bado ni squatters. JM Karaoke alikam correct kwa utabiri. From 10 millionaires sasa tuko 50 billionaires na 50 million beggars, sio siri. Akitafsiri msanii ana feel kama Mwariama akikagua mwili wa Baimungi generali, machozi yakimlenga kwa macho, akijiuliza kama walipigana msituni miaka 12 ndo wakuje kuishia hivi kwa mikono ya Mwafrika mwenzao. Ni madharau. Matunda ya uhuru, mbegu ya uhuru kumeshwa na damu ya Maumau, lakini mashabiki na wanao ndo bado wanavuna mazao.
I understand that for that.
Tunasimama.
Yes, I think it deserves.
That one?
Thank you.
Whoa.
Leo mama pour into them.
Whoa. Whoa. And you know, it tugs, it goes right there and then comes here.
It's because it's who we are.
Yes.
Literally. Is that what you want your legacy to be when you think? I know those are questions that are artistically impact on society. The orphanage, I want my legacy to be what?
I think I don't really know about my legacy because essentially the way I look at it, we are mortal beings, right? So we can only plan as far as our mortal life ends, right? Like, you know, it's where it ends. So essentially I think for me, the only legacy I care about is what people carry on, right? And because the only way we are able to live on beyond our mortal lives is by how we've impacted people, right? And as far as I'm concerned, this poetry, these words are my biggest gift to humanity. And I hope these words keep me alive, right? So that's, for me, it's about that.
Pudo Poet says, keep shining, keep inspiring. You're a gift to our country, to orphanage. Bibi Usuni says, Mwariama huku kwetu mwambao ni msema kweli. Speak, my son, and the world will hear you. Goodness me, that was profound. That's what the Kikombe says.
Thank you. Thank you.
Where? Orphanage. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Appreciate that.
And keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. The burden is heavy,
No, it is.
but
It is.
it chose you to carry it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, the good book, as there was a priest before me. He says, we only chosen for what we can carry. So, I'd like, at least I'd like to believe that I have the strength to carry mine. Yeah.
How do you?
Exhale.
Yeah.
I play soccer. I love to play soccer. I enjoy playing it more than I enjoy watching it. I play pool, and I attend events, right? Artistic events. And that's how I get to unwind, right? When I'm in the soccer pitch, for me, that's everything is right there. Like I'm not thinking about the nation. I'm not thinking. I'm just in the game, right? And everybody needs that, right? But of course, being capitalism, everybody doesn't have that privilege, where they can create some time for, to kind of unplug from, the loop. Right. So
And be like, everything isn't so bad.
Yeah.
It's a privilege. It really is. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Karibu nikuite Mwariam.
Well, it's become.
Be told. That's what they call you.
Oh
Right?
my God, just because
Look like
of
you've
time.
just had
an epiphany. No, it's because I wanted to ask, and I saw someone on YouTube asking for the origin of the name Dolphinage.
Yeah, that's a long story. But basically, so I lost my parents when I was young, right? And I think when people think of orphans, they think of, somebody that needs pity, somebody who needs to be, kind of handled with tenderness. I was like, no, I'm embracing that. It's like sort of self-deprecating in a way, so I'm just embracing it as an identity instead of feeling ashamed or feeling small about it. It's like, so yeah, I'm going to own this and make it into an identity that, people don't see pity and everything else, right?
Beautiful. In the next hour, we are going to look at another culture. So this was spoken word and what it's doing and how it's changing the society. There's also another culture of just motorsport, drag racing on Kenyan roads. That's a conversation that's coming up. It's 9 a.m. Good morning. Keep it here.